This is Catching Up with the Kernel. I'm your host, Giana Gallo, and today we have a very special episode. We bring on Mike Abate, an experienced litigator who has practiced at all levels of the federal court system. His career began in the U.S. Department of Justice, and after roughly 8 years, he joined a large regional firm in Louisville where he became partners and chair of the firm's appellate practice group. A little bit more about Abate. He is a graduate from Harvard College in 2000 and received his Juris Doctor degree from Stanford. Abate received several awards and honors over his career, but most recently he received the Best Lawyers 2023 Appellate Practice in Louisville. Abate concentrates his practice on healthcare, media, and appellate litigation. He represents media organizations in litigation over constitutional issues and access to public records. Today, we bring him on to talk about his recent article along with John Filshaker, his colleagues, Anti-Transparency Bill Must Be Stopped article that was published in the Kernel. All right, let's catch up. Today, we welcome on a very special guest to the podcast. Would you feel free to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. My name is Mike Abate.
And what do you do? What's your career?
I'm an attorney. I work at the firm of Kaplan, Johnson, Abate, and Bird. And among other things, we do a lot of media and First Amendment law. Yeah,
so you just recently published, along with your colleague, John Filshaker. Flyshaker. Yep. Thank you. A guest column about anti-transparency bill must be stopped. This was published February 15th. Can you just give me the rundown on this article, on this column that you wrote?
Yeah, absolutely. So John and I have the pleasure of representing the Kentucky Press Association and all of its member media organizations, newspapers, including the Kernel. And we wrote this op-ed that ran statewide in a number of different papers because we were really worried about a new bill in the Kentucky legislature that would have, really gutted the open records law in Kentucky. It would have been terrible for the state and its citizens.
Yeah, the editor's note says that your colleague John, he was among the original authors of the state's open record policy. So, he kind of was one of the founders of this, and now you've really kind of tagged along and become really passionate about this. So what is exactly the Open Records Policy Act? Mm-hmm. What is this?
I think it's one of the most important laws in this state. The Open Records Act is the vehicle that normal citizens can use to know what their government is doing with their dollars and in their name. And yes, it's often used by media, but it is used every day across the Commonwealth by average citizens to find out information about any state, local, county, city, agency, employee, or board. Yeah. It's just crucial, good governance, full stop.
Yeah, I know in your article, right, you give this really good example about you state want to know why your kid's teacher or coach was fired, parentheses, or wasn't. Sorry, the allegations in the investigation file are not the final action, so you can't see them, which I think really paint a good picture on how important this act is.
Yeah, so the bill as originally proposed would have redefined public record in a way that our article lays out, would have just gutted basically everything that you could get under the Open Records Law. Records about an investigation into a public employee accused of misconduct, or records, that the public paid for. Maybe an agency paid a lot of money to a consulting firm to give them a proposal for something, and millions of taxpayer dollars are on the line. You couldn't see what that said. It would have incredibly narrowed the scope of the Open Records Law to make it almost meaningless. So we sounded the alarm. We spoke out. While I'm happy to say that we got some good traction in getting some of the worst parts of the law pared back. Just yesterday, I was up testifying about the amended, revised bill. There's still some real loopholes in it, and there's still some real problems that I think, we're going to try to get fixed. It's certainly better than it was when we wrote that article, but it's still a real problem.
Yeah, and that's, I feel really telling. You published this February 15th. It's almost been roughly a month, and you have made progress, but what are those loopholes that you're facing now?
Mm-hmm. So one of the key issues that we've been litigating across the state involves what happens when a public employee sends a message, but they do it on their phone. Maybe they're texting, or they send it on a private email account, a Gmail account. And, there are some times where there are people who are like a volunteer, board member, commissioner who might not have a government email. And so they use their private email to send government business. And then there's sometimes people just choose to send text messages. We think, and not just we think, the courts have said all those things are public records, and therefore they're subject to disclosure. The attempt with the new bill is, part good, part bad. They want to require every agency or board or commission to create an email account that a public employee or a board member or commissioner can use. And they want to mandate that everybody use those accounts. We're all in favor of those two things. I think they're great. But the third thing that the new bill would do is say, and so long as an agency goes ahead and creates those accounts, they don't have to search or ask these employees to search for any personal device or any private email account. And we think that's a problem. That's a huge loophole, because if somebody really wanted to hide something, all they got to do is send it on their Gmail or text. And this would absolve the agency of any responsibility for, not only searching it themselves, even just asking, hey, did anybody send any messages, on their private email account, or anybody sending text messages about this subject? And let me put some meat on the bones. I used this example yesterday in the legislature. In Jefferson County, in the first couple of days of school, there was an epic meltdown in the busing. It was really a debacle, and kids were waiting hours and hours. Some kids didn't get home until 10 p.m. at night. A number of media outlets, and I think citizens, requested records from the district about, hey, give us your communications, what's going on, so they can understand what was happening in real time. And the response that came back said, we don't have any emails. People were texting about it. Superintendent, the transportation director, and other, senior people, they were texting each other. Well, under this bill, nobody could ever know what they were saying to each other, what was happening in real time, right? They would just be exempt from doing it. And we think that's wrong. Obviously, the citizens and the taxpayers have a right to know what their government officials are doing. And, if it had been done by email, we would plainly be entitled to get it. We don't think there should be such an easy loophole where you can just send a text instead of an email and then hide whatever you want. That the invitation for bad behavior, it's, people are just going to avoid putting things in email so that they can avoid scrutiny. It's happened as long as we've had transparency laws, we've had people trying to evade them. And this is just like a giant flashing, red light.
Yeah.
It's going to invite people, I think, to abuse it.
Oh, my gosh. So if this anti-transparency bill gets passed, what does it, this is kind of a two-part question. What does it do to the open record system? Obviously, you kind of highlighted at that a lot in your answers. But then also just how does it kind of affect Kentucky, the Commonwealth, even on a national scale? Do you feel like this could really change society?
Kentucky has long had one of the best open record statutes in the country. It was enacted, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary. It's been great, and it's really been a landmark and a leader nationally. There have been attempts, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, to really pare that back. We've been successful at defeating most of those. We've had to make a few deals and compromise on certain things in order to preserve the real core of the law, and we think it's still very strong. This would be, I think, a serious error, and it would be a serious intrusion into the public's right to know. The whole point of this statute, and if you go back to the bill in the 70s, that created the open records law, the preamble said, the people are sovereign, and the people's elected representatives and public employees work for them. We did not surrender our sovereignty to the bureaucrats who run our state, right? And that was the motivating principle behind this, and that is a nonpartisan principle. People have the right to know what's being done in their name by their representatives with their money. I think that should be uncontroversial. If we create a giant loophole where all you got to do is send a text and all of a sudden it's like, mysteriously not a public document, that erodes the public's right to know. I mean, it will inevitably. And I think it's terrible policy. And, we think there are some easy tweaks actually that could be made to this bill to fix it. And we're happy to continue pushing for those. But, we're still opposed to the law, even as amended. Obviously, nothing's done till it's done. We're very opposed to the original version of this bill, which would have redefined public record altogether to put all sorts of stuff off limits. But, you know, going down this road is dangerous, and we see no basis or reason for it.
So I kind of want information on how this might seem like a silly question, but just as background, how can a bill get passed through court, and how does a bill become a law?
Well, so in the Kentucky legislature, you know, what will happen is a bill will get introduced. It'll have to be assigned to a committee. It'll be heard in a committee. Yesterday, this bill, House Bill 509, started in the House. It went before the state government committee. They did approve it, you know, the narrower version. We still have concerns, but that'll go to the House floor. They'll have to be approved by the House, the entire House, if they do that. From there, it would go over to the Senate, and it would be assigned to a committee in the Senate, and we'd have a similar hearing like we had yesterday in the House with testimony from people who support it and oppose it. And they'll have to be voted through the Senate floor. Then it would go to the governor, who would have the option to sign or veto the bill. If he vetoes it, it comes back, and they can override it, you know, with a majority vote in each chamber. If they don't override it, then he can't.
Do you know Governor Andy Beshear's thoughts on this possible bill?
We don't know. I don't think I've seen any comments from the governor on the revised bill, so I think that's a great question that somebody should ask the governor. I do know when Andy Beshear was the attorney general that he wrote an opinion saying messages contained on people's personal devices are public records so long as they relate to public business. But I don't know what he would do if this bill were to land on his desk. Somebody should ask him that.
Yeah. Why hasn't he been asked?
I don't know.
That's very interesting to me.
You know, there are a lot of bills moving through the legislature, and at any given time, you know, it's possible he's made a statement and I just haven't seen it. But
yeah,
to my knowledge, I don't think I've seen anything about the revised bill from the governor's office.
So kind of gearing towards college students, right? I feel like in our generation, or my generation, younger generation, people are either extremely into politics or not. And that's maybe just my opinion. But what out of, you know, this and dealing with government, bills, laws, all kind of things, government-based politics, do you feel like students need to take away from your article and this meeting, this interview?
Yeah. Well, in one sense, I'll say students, I think current students are in a better position to understand the dangers of this bill than folks in the legislature, the older generations, because everybody communicates by text message, right? Nobody calls anymore. Nobody emails anymore. It takes too long. We're just texting each other back and forth or using other forms of instant communication. So, you know, people will understand, I think, that a lot of communication going forward is going to be conducted in means like text message or other similar electronic communications, all of which currently fall under the definition of a public record, right? I think what people need to understand how this affects their lives. So let's bring it right back here to campus. The Kernel has fought a number of important open records battles, including a battle they won in the Kentucky Supreme Court about the right to see records of faculty members who are accused of mistreating students. And the Kernel looked at that not only here, but at other universities across the state, as did other student papers, and, you know, unearthed patterns of people who were repeatedly accused of sexual harassment and misconduct, who were allowed to quietly resign, move on to other institutions where they repeated those same offenses. You know, these kinds of records are obtainable under the Open Records Act, and it's through the work of students and student journalists that this stuff often comes to light. It's crucially important. And I think it's self-evident for people to understand that, you know, we have an interest in being able to see what are in the records of the university or of the local government or of the state government, you know, or even, you know, county government. I think there are any number of things you might want to inquire into, from, you know, disciplinary records to, you know, simple proposals. You know, we used the open records law when Amazon was doing its big competition to see what cities were going to land the new Amazon headquarters, right? Turns out Kentucky in Louisville put together a bid and promised billions of dollars of giveaway in taxpayer money, and they were going to give them a state park and all sorts of other stuff. You know, the public has a right to know what our officials are offering to give away in that kind of a circumstance, so we can weigh in on the wisdom of, you know, should we give away $2.5 billion in tax incentives? Maybe it's worth it. Maybe it's not. It'll depend, right? But people have the right to know. in that kind of a circumstance. We've certainly fought it over misconduct records, both not only, at universities, police departments, local government officials. We use it every day. Our clients use it, and citizens use it every day to find out, what their local county government is up to, and who submitted the bids for that project that got awarded, right? That the Open Records Act allows you to see that and make sure that it was the lowest bid and the best bid, and the mayor's not driving the contract to his brother or his cousin, right? This is the bread and butter vehicle we use to get transparency.
I completely agree with everything you just said, especially, as a young journalist myself. It makes me really nervous for the future if this bill does get passed. What does investigative journalism look like now? Because we don't have access to open records. We can't get any open records. So I appreciate all of your fight, and it does. This makes me really nervous.
Yeah. Well, we're going to keep at it. I mean, I will say this, like if they pass the bill that cleared committee yesterday, we've already achieved a significant victory in scaling back what would have been essentially the elimination of the open records law. I mean, there would have been some few things left, but almost nothing. So we've come a long way, but we can't stop fighting. And people need to be engaged about this, and they can contact their legislators. And students on campus who come from other parts of the state, contact your legislators at home. Like, they need to understand that this matters to people. And there's nothing more powerful than hearing from one of your constituents. So I strongly encourage people to contact their legislators and get their family members to do the same thing.
So going into your article, right, I kind of annotated some things just so that I could understand, as well as, some people out there. So you bring up like final action in quotation marks. What does that exactly mean? What does that insist of?
So thankfully, that's not in the current version of the bill. The original version would have said something is only a public record if it is a, quote, final action, which was not a defined term. That, to me, was the most pernicious part about that original bill, because it would take probably 95% of the things that are obtainable under open records and put them off limits, because what is a final action? Is it only the very last thing that's done in some narrow policy thing? And, we would have ended up having all sorts of fights that would have made just the routine documents of government business off limits to us. So thankfully, that was an attempt to redefine public records, and thankfully our article and others raising the alarm about this seems to have taken that risk off the table for now.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that. Because I saw that your guest column was published on a lot of news sources and many different publications, which I thought was impeccable, that your voices were heard all over Kentucky.
We have the privilege, as I said, to represent the Press Association, and it's got members from one end of the state to the other. And when bills like this come up that are such a systemic threat, we can use the power of the press to sound the alarm, and that's what we did here. And I think it's had significant effect already. We're not where we need to be, but we're able to put out an article like this, and it ran, I know, in newspapers, all across the state. I could tell because I got lots of phone calls and emails from people all over. When you run in, one of the privileges of representing media and, being out there is all of a sudden I was inundated with phone calls from people who have open records problems, and, they want us to help them get stuff out of their local government. So I was glad to see that. Yeah. We had hit a nerve with so many people.
Yeah, for sure. And especially for sure in the Kernel, too. I know this was a hot topic for a lot of our meetings, just how amazing your article, you and your colleague, John, your article was, because, I think this is kind of a forgotten thing, especially in students, like that open records is a policy and it's a act.
Yeah, well, we've all taken for granted, as I said, we've had one of the best in the country for 50 years, but you got to work to keep it. And, so much of what we're able to understand, and it's not just news reporting, but it's crucial in news reporting, but so much of what people are able to understand and advocate for about the government, we have to know what they're up to, right? And they have to understand that the records they create and the agencies create are actually for the benefit of the public and belong to the public. It's a reminder of the form of government we have, right? We don't hand over all power to the legislators. They work for us. So I think it's very important to keep fighting against the inevitable continued efforts to erode transparency that we see year over year over year.
Yeah.
So, another way I say that sometimes in our litigation, it's the same way, that we can't stop fighting the battles we've already won.
That's a great saying.
We win a case in court and we win some proposition, and then you got to spend the next 10 years like re-winning the same fight with people who just don't want to comply, unfortunately.
Yeah. My last question for you
Sure.
is, again, we've kind of talked about the future, what this bill looks like, but let's go kind of short term.
Mm-hmm.
What do the next weeks look like, days look like, months for this?
Yeah, now is the time for us, but anybody else who's aligned and wants to see this bill changed, to really advocate. The bill's headed to the Senate. Well, it's got to clear the House first, but assuming it clears the House with the committee's approval, start talking to senators, start raising concerns. Hey, I'm not so sure that this is a good idea, and I think that's the thing that needs to be done in the short term, is start talking to folks in the Senate and get them to either make some. There are a few small tweaks I think we could make that would make this palatable, or just agree to take a little bit more time and sit down and think about this more carefully. And that's something we're always happy to do with folks.
Do you have anything else you'd like to say?
No, I just appreciate you guys bringing attention to this. I mean, it is everybody benefits from the open records law, whether they realize it or not, and whether they've ever used it or not. I guarantee you, if you've ever consumed any news or, been around those who are using it, you've benefited from it. And the mere fact that folks know that what they do and what they say and what they write could become public is itself, I think, just an important regulating function of government, right? And so everybody benefits from this, and we all need to step up and fight to keep it strong.
I completely agree. Thank you so much for coming on today and for
Pleasure.
this fantastic guest column that you can check out at kykernel.com if you already haven't. But thank you so much again. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abate, for coming on and talking about this anti-transparency bill. I'm personally very glad that there has been progress, but I appreciate both you and Mr. Flyshaker's hard work in trying to stop the Open Records Act from being demolished from Kentucky and the Commonwealth. So again, thank you so much. To check out their guest column on the Kernel, go to kykernel.com. Feel free to follow us on all social medias. That's Twitter /X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Spotify. But most importantly, thanks for catching up.